dad she dismissed did it free $800,000. 3 years. 14 certified McLaren specialists flown in from 6 different countries. And still nothing. Still silence inside that climate-controlled bay on the 32nd floor of the most expensive residential building in Nashville, Tennessee, where a burnt orange McLaren 720S sat under a fitted cover like a secret nobody could solve. Diane Calloway had run a healthcare technology company worth $11 billion. She had navigated a federal investigation, 2 hostile acquisition attempts, and a Senate subcommittee hearing that lasted 4 days and produced nothing but the understanding from everyone who watched it that she was not a person who lost. She was not a person who ran out of options. She was not a person who kept a car that did not run. And yet, 3 years, $800,000, and the McLaren had not started once since the night her mother died. The man who finally found what 14 specialists could not was a parking garage attendant named Marcus Webb. He had a daughter in 2nd grade, a thermos of community coffee dark roast that he refilled twice per shift, and a background that Diane had never once thought to ask about in the 14 months he had been working 17 floors below her apartment. Drop your city in the comments. Let us see how far this story travels. The Calloway Tower residential building on 5th Avenue South in Nashville was not a place ordinary people lived. This was not a judgment. It was simply a fact, the kind of fact that a city acknowledges without ceremony, the way it acknowledges that some blocks are different from other blocks, that some addresses carry a different gravity, that the zip code on a piece of mail can tell you certain things before you open the envelope. The building had 41 floors. It had a private garage facility that occupied floors 31 and 32, accessible only by a dedicated elevator that required a resident key fob and a pin. The garage had heated floors, which were a standard amenity in the building rather than a luxury, the way things become standard when enough money is applied to them long enough. It had individual climate-controlled bays, each with its own humidity management system, because the cars that lived here were not ordinary cars, and the people who owned them had specific expectations about the conditions in which those cars would be kept. Diane Calloway lived on the 39th floor and had owned 2 of the private bays since she purchased her penthouse unit 7 years earlier. In the first bay, she kept a Mercedes-Benz S584 MATIC sedan in obsidian black, which was her working car, the car her driver Marcus took her to the office in every morning and back every evening, the car that was serviced on schedule and replaced on schedule, and which she had no particular feeling about one way or another because it was a tool rather than an object. In the second bay, under a fitted McLaren cover in charcoal gray that had been ordered from the manufacturer, and had her initials embroidered at the front corner in a thread 1 shade lighter than the fabric, sat the 720S. It was a 2019 model. Vermilion red was the official McLaren color designation, but the car read orange in person, a deep saturated orange that looked different in different lights, almost amber in the morning, almost red in the evening, the color of something alive and alert. It had been her mother's. This required some explanation, because Diane's mother, Ruth Calloway, had not been a woman people associated with a McLaren 720S. Ruth had been a retired schoolteacher from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where she had taught high school English for 31 years, and had driven a sequence of modest Hondas beginning with a 1988 Accord and ending with a 2017 Civic that she had bought used from a dealership in Smyrna and had planned to drive until it stopped running. The McLaren had been a gift from Diane for Ruth's 71st birthday, which fell on a June Saturday 2 summers before Ruth died, on a day when the Cumberland River light came in long and golden over Nashville and the city felt, briefly, like a place where extraordinary things were reasonable. Ruth had stood in the parking lot of a restaurant where Diane had taken her for birthday lunch and looked at the orange car with a bow on it the size of a suitcase and said, in the precise, measured tone she had used for 31 years to respond to student work that surprised her, well, that is something. She had never driven it. She had wanted to. Diane knew she had wanted to because Ruth had called her on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks after the birthday and said she had been reading about the McLaren online and watching videos of people driving it, and she thought she might like to take a lesson in it sometime from a professional because she was not going to get in that car without knowing what she was doing first. Ruth was like that. She prepared for things. She did not attempt things she was not prepared for. They had talked about the lesson, about finding the right instructor, about waiting until the weather was right. Ruth had a list of questions about the car that she had written in the small spiral notebook she kept on her kitchen counter for things she did not want to forget. Diane had seen the notebook on the counter the last time she visited, open to the page with the McLaren questions, the handwriting neat and slanted the way Ruth's handwriting had always been, learned in an era when handwriting was taught as a discipline. Ruth died on a Friday in October, a stroke in the kitchen of her Murfreesboro house, fast and without warning and without the lesson and without Diane there, because Diane had been in Washington, D.C. at a healthcare policy conference and had landed at Nashville International Airport to find 3 missed calls from her mother's neighbor on her phone. She had sat in the back of a black car on the way from the airport to Murfreesboro, and she had not cried. This was not a performance of composure. She simply could not locate the grief yet. It was there, she knew it was there, but it had not arrived at the surface. It was somewhere deep below language in the part of a person that takes longer to receive the information than the mind does. She had handled the week that follows a death the way she handled every operational crisis, with a systematic attention to the things that needed to be done and a deliberate suppression of the things that could not be done anything about yet. The funeral home. The calls. The house, Ruth's sister driving up from Chattanooga. The neighbors who came with casseroles. Diane had eaten the casseroles because Ruth had raised her to accept kindness that was offered sincerely, and the casseroles were kindness, and accepting them was the right thing. On the last morning, she had driven the McLaren from Ruth's garage to the transport truck she had arranged. She had sat in the driver's seat with the engine off for a few minutes before the transport arrived, her hands on the wheel, looking at the interior, the black leather, the carbon fiber trim, the dashboard display that showed nothing because the engine was off. The spiral notebook was not in the car. It was on Ruth's kitchen counter, and Diane had taken it home with her, and it was in a drawer in her penthouse now, and she had not opened it since. She had the McLaren brought to the Callaway Tower garage. She had the bay set to the correct humidity and temperature. She had intended at first to drive it. She had told herself she would drive it in the spring, when the weather was good, when she had had enough time to find the right instructor, the way Ruth had wanted to. Spring came. She did not drive it. The thing that was supposed to feel like honoring Ruth had not yet resolved into a feeling she could identify, and she was not a person who performed gestures she didn't mean. She would drive it when it meant what it was supposed to mean. She would wait. 8 months after Ruth died, on a January morning, Diane came down to the garage to put something in the McLaren's boot, a package she had meant to send Ruth for Christmas and had still not dealt with, and the car would not start. She was not alarmed. Cars had batteries. Batteries drained when cars sat. She called the building's facility management team, and they sent someone to look at it, and the someone reported back that the battery was fully charged and the car would still not start, and the reason was not apparent. This was the beginning. The first specialist came from McLaren's regional service network, their senior diagnostic technician for the Southeast United States, a man who had spent 16 years working on McLaren vehicles exclusively, and who arrived with a diagnostic system that communicated directly with the car's onboard computer architecture, and could read every sensor value, every module output, every electronic signal in the vehicle simultaneously. He spent 2 full days with the car. He ran the diagnostic system 47 times from different configurations. He spoke to McLaren's technical support line in Woking, England, twice. He left without fixing it. He told Diane the car had no detectable fault. Every system read within specification. The diagnostic computer reported a fully functioning vehicle. The vehicle would not start. These 2 facts were, he said carefully, genuinely contradictory, which meant the problem was somewhere that the diagnostic system was not reaching, and he was not able to tell her where that was. The second specialist came from a private McLaren restoration facility in Atlanta. The third came from a performance automotive engineering firm in Charlotte. The fourth was a man who had worked for McLaren at the Woking factory for 11 years before moving to the United States, and who was regarded in the high-performance automotive community as one of the most knowledgeable people alive on the technical architecture of the 720S. He was genuinely one of the most knowledgeable people alive on the technical architecture of the 720S. He spent a week in the Bay. He isolated the fault to the car's powertrain control module communication network. He could see that something in the communication between the PCM and the secondary systems was being misrouted, producing a cascade that prevented the ignition sequence from completing. He could not find where the misrouting originated. He left with a detailed report and a direct apology, which Diane respected because she had learned that the people who apologized directly were the ones who had genuinely tried. This pattern repeated over 3 years. Specialists from McLaren's private ownership support division, engineers from independent supercar workshops in Miami, Los Angeles, Houston. A Dutch engineer named Van der Berg who had worked on McLaren racing programs and who spent 10 days with the car and came closer than anyone to identifying the fault origin before hitting a wall he described, in an email to Diane, as a diagnostic dead zone, an area of the car's electronic architecture where the standard tools produced readings that were simultaneously clean and wrong, where the instrument said nothing was broken and something obviously was. The cost accumulated. Travel. Labor, custom diagnostic equipment that 2 different firms had built specifically for this car. Parts ordered and installed and removed because they had seemed, based on the available evidence, like plausible solutions, and had proven not to be. After 3 years, the total came to $812,000. Diane knew the exact number because she tracked it, not obsessively but precisely, in the same way she tracked all costs that were departing without producing results. Because costs that departed without producing results were the thing that killed companies, and she did not allow herself to become comfortable with them even when the absolute figure was small relative to her net worth. $800,000 was not a meaningful sum to Diane Calloway in any practical sense. It was less than 2 months of the salary she paid her chief technology officer. It was less than the operating cost of running her company's Nashville campus for 4 days. The money was not the point. The point was the promise. The private, unsaid, binding promise she had made to herself standing in Ruth's garage on the morning the transport truck came, with her hands on the steering wheel and the engine off, and the spiral notebook on the kitchen counter with its list of questions about the car. She had promised, not in words but in the way you promise things that are too important for words, that she would make it right, that she would drive it, that Ruth's question about the lesson would eventually have an answer, and the answer would be her daughter on an open road, doing the thing Ruth had wanted to do and never got to do. She had not made it right. 3 years in, she had a car that 14 specialists had collectively failed to fix, $800,000 in diagnostic costs, and a promise that kept getting further away instead of closer. There was a drawer in her penthouse office with a spiral notebook in it that she did not open. She had not opened it in 3 years. She walked past the drawer in the morning when she came in for her first call of the day, and she walked past it in the evening when she left, and she had never once pulled it open, because the things inside it required her to be in a different kind of ready than she had been able to get to yet. Every failed specialist felt like another installment of the same quiet defeat. Every time she came down to the garage bay and looked at the covered car, she felt the distance between where she was and where she had promised to get, and she felt it in the specific way that intelligent, capable people feel the gaps between their intentions and their results, not as an abstract shortcoming, but as a present and physical thing, a weight on the chest, a tightness in the jaw that she sometimes did not notice until she was halfway to her office and her neck had been knotted for an hour. The 15th specialist arrived on a Tuesday in March. His name was Dr. James Afogbu, and he had a Ph.D. in automotive electrical systems from Loughborough University in England, had published 9 papers on powertrain control module architecture in supercar platforms, and had been described by the mutual contact who recommended him as the person you call when everyone else has given up. He had a team of 3 engineers with him. They brought a custom multi-channel oscilloscope system that he had designed himself for diagnosing exactly the class of intermittent fault that the 720S was exhibiting. He was 53, unhurried, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades in rooms with difficult problems and have learned that stillness is not passivity, but its own form of action. He walked around the McLaren 3 times before touching it. He asked to see all 14 previous reports. He read them over 2 hours, making notes in a small moleskine notebook in ink so fine it was barely visible. Then he looked at Diane and said, "The previous teams were each working from the reports of the teams before them. By the time your 7th or 8th team arrived, the search had been narrowed to the areas the first 6 teams had already eliminated. The actual fault may have been eliminated from consideration before anyone with the right reference knowledge looked at it." He spent 12 days with the car. On the 12th day, Diane found him standing outside the bay rather than inside it, looking at the covered car through the bay's glass front with his hands in his pockets and his notebook closed at his side. This posture, she had learned, was the posture of a person who had reached the end of what they knew and was deciding how to say it. "I have to be honest with you," he said. "The fault is real. I have confirmed that the PCM communication network has an anomaly that is not visible on any standard diagnostic system and requires specific knowledge of a non-factory modification to identify. I know the fault exists. I cannot tell you with confidence where it is." "You think the car was modified," Diane said. "I think someone added aftermarket electronics to this car at some point before you received it, and those electronics were integrated into the factory wiring in a way that was technically sophisticated, but that created a communication pathway the factory diagnostic architecture doesn't know to read. The fault is somewhere in that integration. Without documentation of the modification, I cannot tell you exactly where." A silence. "I'm sorry," Dr. Ofogbu said. "Thank you," Diane said, in the flat professional voice she had developed for receiving news she did not want. "Send me your report." She stood in the empty bay for a long time after he left, looking at the cover over the McLaren, the charcoal gray with her initials in the slightly lighter thread at the front corner. The building's ventilation system ran in the background. Everything was very clean, very still, very expensive, and absolutely nothing was fixed. Marcus Webb had been working the overnight and early morning shift in the Callaway Tower parking garage for 14 months when the McLaren stopped starting. He had come to the job through a residential building management company called Elevate Property Services, which contracted parking and facilities services to 11 high-rise residential buildings in the Nashville metropolitan area. Marcus worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift at Callaway Tower because it was the shift that let him take his daughter Amara to school in the morning and be home when she came back in the afternoon. Amara was 7. She was in 2nd grade at John Early Museum Magnet Middle School, which was not actually a middle school, but had been named when the building served a different grade configuration, and the name had stayed. She had her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, which was a loud, unself-conscious laugh that she produced without warning at things that struck her as genuinely funny, which were sometimes the same things that struck adults as funny and sometimes were not, and which Marcus had never once tried to moderate because he thought a person's real laugh was one of the most important things they had. Amara's mother, Priscilla, had died when Amara was 3. A diagnosis that moved faster than the treatment, one of those medical timelines that the doctors describe with precision and that the people living inside them find impossible to absorb, where the numbers are clear and the reality of the numbers is not. Priscilla had been 31. She had been a kindergarten teacher. She had been, by the account of everyone who knew her, one of those people whose presence in a room was qualitatively different from its absence, the kind of person who made groups of people more themselves rather than less, who found the funny thing and the true thing simultaneously and could say both without it feeling like performance. Marcus had taken Amara home from his sister's house, where she had been staying while Priscilla was in the hospital for the last 2 weeks, and he had driven home along Gallatin Avenue in the March dark, and he had carried Amara asleep from the car seat into the apartment, and he had put her in her bed and sat on the edge of it for a very long time, listening to her breathe, and he had understood with the particular clarity that grief sometimes produces, cutting through the noise to the single essential thing, that the only job that mattered now was this one. He had been, before Amara was born and before Priscilla died, an automotive systems engineer. He had worked for a company called Stratford Dynamics, a private engineering firm that provided systems integration services to performance automotive manufacturers, including 2 British manufacturers with whom Stratford maintained long-term technical partnership agreements. One of those manufacturers was McLaren Automotive. Marcus had spent 3 years on McLaren programs. He had been part of the team that worked on the powertrain control module communication architecture for 2 model generations, including the generation that preceded the 720S, when the 720S platform was in development. His team had been brought in to consult on the integration of the new PCM framework with Stratford's proprietary secondary electronic systems, which McLaren was incorporating under a supplier agreement that, for reasons of competitive confidentiality, was not part of the car's publicly available technical documentation. He had known things about McLaren's electronic architecture that were not in any diagnostic manual. Not because he had withheld them or concealed them, but because they were proprietary knowledge belonging to Stratford Dynamics and McLaren Automotive, and the nature of the work he had done was such that it lived in the specialized technical memory of the engineers who had built it, not in the documentation sets available to the external market. He had left Stratford 8 months after Priscilla died. He had tried to stay. He had gone back after the bereavement leave with the intention of resuming, and he had found that the work, which required long hours and frequent travel, and the sustained high-intensity focus of systems engineering at a performance automotive level, was not compatible with being the only parent of a 3-year-old who was trying to understand where her mother had gone. He had not made the decision dramatically. He had made it the way he made most decisions, quietly, after thinking it through completely, having confirmed to himself that there was no configuration of the variables that produced a different answer. He gave his notice. He stayed through the transition of his programs to the 2 engineers he trusted most on his team. He said goodbye to the people he had worked with for 6 years. He went home, and he did not go back. The years between Stratford and Callaway Tower were not a story of decline. They were a story of reorganization. He had done maintenance work, facilities work, the kind of work that was technically complex enough to be interesting and scheduled in a way that put Amara first. He had been reliable, thorough, and quietly exceptional at every job he had taken, in the specific way that people with strong technical foundations are exceptional at work that does not fully use those foundations. He saw how systems connected. He diagnosed problems by looking at the whole rather than the parts. He did not do this to impress anyone. He did it because it was how his mind worked. He had been at Callaway Tower for 14 months. His direct supervisor, a facilities manager named Brenda Ockhaffer, had noted in both of his performance reviews that he was consistently assigned the diagnostically complex jobs that the other attendants brought to her, that he solved them reliably without making a production of it, and that she did not know his full background but suspected it was more than a parking garage required. He had not told Brenda about Stratford. He had not told anyone at Callaway Tower. His application had listed his work history, including Stratford Dynamics and the automotive systems engineering role, but the intake process had processed him as a parking garage applicant and routed him accordingly. And in 14 months, no one in the building's management structure had looked at the application beyond what it said about his fitness for the job he had applied for. He worked the night shift. He drank community coffee dark roast from a thermos that his mother had given him the Christmas after Priscilla died. A red thermos with MARCUS written on the side in permanent marker in his mother's handwriting, which had faded somewhat over 4 years of washing, but was still legible. He kept it in the break room during his shift and refilled it twice, once at midnight and once at 4 in the morning, which was the lowest point of the overnight shift, the hour when the building was most fully asleep and the garage was quietest, and the fluorescent lights did their particular thing with the polished concrete floor. He knew the cars in this garage the way you know the things you spend your nights with. Not intimately, not with affection necessarily, but with the specific familiarity of proximity and repetition. He knew the sound each car made when its climate control cycled. He knew which ones were driven regularly and which sat for weeks. He had opinions about all of them, held quietly and privately, the opinions of someone who had spent years thinking seriously about what automobiles could and should do. He had opinions about the McLaren. He had known from the first week that it was a 720S, and he had known from the second week that it was not running, and he had known from the specific quality of its stillness, the particular way it sat under its cover, that it was not running because of neglect or disuse, but because of something that mattered, something that its owner was trying to fix and had not been able to. He had watched over 14 months as the specialists came and went. He had seen the diagnostic equipment arrive. He had been in the garage during 3 of the specialist visits, doing his scheduled maintenance work, and he had listened, with the patient attention of a person who knows what he is listening to the conversations between the specialists and the building's facility team about what they were trying and not finding. He had thought more than once about saying something. About walking to the specialist and saying the specific thing that he believed, based on everything he knew about the 720S platform and its PCM architecture, was the reason every diagnostic tool was coming back clean. He had not. Not because he was timid or uncertain, but because it was not his car, it was not his problem, and he was a parking garage attendant, and the person working on the car was a credentialed expert who had come a long way and deserved to work without interference from the overnight shift. But the morning after Dr. Afogbu left, Marcus stood in the garage at 5:45 in the morning, an hour before his shift ended, and he looked at the covered McLaren in its bay. And he thought about what Afogbu had said about a non-factory modification, and a communication pathway the factory diagnostic architecture didn't know to read. And he recognized, with the specific, quiet certainty of a person who has heard the shape of a problem they know the answer to, that the specialist had found the edge of what he knew and stopped one step before the answer. He stood there for a while. He drank the last of his community coffee. He picked up his phone and he looked at it for a moment, and then he put it back in his pocket. He was going to say something, not to the specialist, to the owner. He did not approach Diane Calloway directly, because he had not met Diane Calloway directly, and the protocols of the building's service staff made clear that resident contact was to be initiated through the facility management team rather than by individual service employees. This was a reasonable protocol. He intended to follow it. He wrote a note instead. He sat in the break room at 6 in the morning in the last minutes before his shift ended, and he wrote it on the back of a maintenance log sheet, which was not the ideal paper for a communication of this kind, but was what he had. He wrote it in the careful, clear handwriting that Priscilla had once told him looked like a person who had been made to practice cursive by a teacher who took it seriously, which was accurate. He wrote, "My name is Marcus Webb. I work the overnight shift in the parking garage. I know I have no standing to comment on your car, but I want to tell you something that may or may not be useful. The specialists who have worked on the 720S have been looking for a fault in the factory systems. The fault may not be in the factory systems. The 720S in your bay has aftermarket electronics integrated into the PCM communication network that were added by a supplier under a confidential agreement with McLaren during the development phase of this generation. The integration creates a secondary communication pathway that standard diagnostic tools are not programmed to read. If the fault is in that secondary pathway, every clean diagnostic reading is accurate about the factory systems and meaningless about the actual problem. I know this because I worked on those systems at Stratford Dynamics. If this is useful to you, I am here overnight. If it is not, please disregard." He folded it once. He went to Brenda's office, which was empty at this hour, and he put the note in her inbox with a separate sticky note that said, "For Ms. Calloway, Ray, the 720S please pass along when convenient," and left his name and his building phone extension. He went home. He made Amara's breakfast, oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins from the Bob's Red Mill Quick Oats canister on the counter, which was the only oatmeal Amara would eat because she had strong opinions about texture, and had conducted what she described as an extensive survey of available oatmeal brands, the survey consisting of 3 tries from different brands before declaring Bob's Red Mill the winner and closing the survey permanently. He drove her to school. He drove home. He went to sleep at 9:15. Brenda found the note at 8:30. She read it twice. She was not a person who second-guessed her staff, and she was not a person who withheld information that might be relevant to residents, and she had her own file of observations about Marcus Webb that included 2 separate entries noting that he saw things in the building's mechanical systems that other staff had missed. She put the note in an envelope and sent it upstairs with the morning mail run. Diane read it at her desk at 9:45, between her 8:30 board call and her 11 o'clock with her chief legal officer. She read it once, quickly, with the scanning speed of a person who reads a great deal of material and is good at extracting the operative sentence from any document. The operative sentence, she identified immediately, was, "I know this because I worked on those systems at Stratford Dynamics." She read it again, slowly this time. She called her chief of staff, a meticulous and unflappable woman named Greta Huang who had been managing Diane's calendar and her operational life for 9 years, and who had never once given her information that was incorrect. "I need you to look up Stratford Dynamics," Diane said, "specifically their McLaren work, and I need you to find out everything you can about a Marcus Webb who worked there." Greta called back 40 minutes later. Stratford Dynamics, she reported, was a legitimate and highly regarded private automotive systems engineering firm. They had a confirmed historical partnership with McLaren Automotive. Their work was under NDA in several specific areas, which meant the public record did not describe the full scope of their engagement. But the industry sources Greta had consulted confirmed that Stratford had been involved in PCM architecture work on at least 2 McLaren generations. As for Marcus Webb, he had a LinkedIn profile, sparse but real, that listed Stratford Dynamics under his work history with the title Senior Systems Integration Engineer and the dates 2012 to 2018. "He left Stratford in 2018, Greta said, "and he's been working our parking garage since last year," Diane said. A silence of the particular kind that occurs when 2 people are both looking at the same fact from the same angle. "Yes," Greta said. Diane put the phone down. She looked out her 39th floor window at the Nashville skyline, which was doing its mid-morning thing, the Cumberland River catching light in the middle distance, the Nissan Stadium visible on the far bank, the sky the particular clear blue that comes to Tennessee after a March cold front passes. She thought about 14 specialists and $800,000 and 3 years of diagnostic tools that could not find the answer. She picked up the phone again. "Get me Brenda Ackhaffer," she said. Marcus was woken by his phone at 2:15 in the afternoon. He had been asleep for 5 hours. He looked at the screen, saw the building's facilities management number, and answered it. It was Brenda. She told him that Ms. Calloway had read the note and would like to speak with him. She said Ms. Calloway had asked if he would come up to her penthouse at 4:30 or if a different time would work better. Marcus lay on his back on his bed and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and put a bar of gold across the wall above the closet door. From Amara's room, which was down the hall, he could hear the sound of the audio story she had put on when she got home from school, a narrated chapter book about a girl who discovered she could communicate with bees. 4:30 works, he said. He showered, put on the closest thing he had to professional clothes, which was dark pants and a button-down shirt in dark blue that he wore to parent-teacher conferences, and which Amara described as your serious shirt. He told Amara that he had a meeting in the building and that he would be back before dinner, and that she should call his cell if she needed anything and not open the door for anyone who was not their neighbor, Mrs. Flores. "Why do you have a meeting?" Amara asked from her position on the couch with her B-book still playing on the small speaker on the coffee table. "About a car," he said. "In the parking garage?" "Sort of." He looked at her. "I'll explain later." She seemed satisfied with this. She was a child who did not require more information than she was given if she trusted that the information would arrive eventually. He had worked to earn that trust, and he considered it one of the more important things he had built in the last 4 years. The penthouse elevator required a guest code, which the building's front desk provided when he identified himself. The elevator opened into a private entrance hall with a kind of restrained luxury that communicated money through the absence of ostentation rather than its presence. Very good materials, very little of them, nothing that was there for any reason other than its actual function. Greta Huang met him and walked him to a sitting room off the main living area. Diane was there, in a chair by the window with her laptop open and a cup of coffee cooling beside it, wearing the kind of clothes that very powerful people wear when they are in their own homes and have decided the meeting does not require performance, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater the color of fog. She looked at him the way he had noticed she looked at everything, quickly and then more slowly, the second pass being the one that actually registered. "Mr. Webb," she said, "sit down, please." He sat across from her. He did not do the thing that people do when they sit across from someone with significantly more money than they have, the performance of awareness of the power differential. He just sat, the way he sat everywhere, with the quality of presence that did not require circumstances to confirm it. "Tell me about Stratford," she said. He told her. He told her about the McLaren engagement, about the PCM communication architecture work, about the secondary electronics pathway that had been integrated under the supplier agreement. He told her what he believed was happening with her car, in specific technical terms that he did not simplify because he could see from the way she listened that she did not need them simplified. She listened with complete attention. She did not interrupt. She did not write anything down, which he noticed, and which meant she was retaining it rather than transcribing it, which in his experience was the mark of someone who processed information at a deeper level than note-taking allowed. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The previous specialists didn't know about the Stratford integration," she said. "The integration was under NDA," he said. "It's not in any documentation they would have had access to." Without knowing it existed, they couldn't look for it, and because the factory systems were all reading clean, they had no reason to look outside the factory architecture. "And you know it exists because you built it. Part of it," he said. "I was on the team that built part of it." She looked at him for a moment with the expression he would learn to recognize over the following weeks, the expression of a person who is recalibrating their model of a situation. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" she said. "You've been here 14 months. He looked at the window. The Nashville light was going gold in the late afternoon. "It wasn't my car," he said, "and there were specialists working on it, people who had been brought in specifically to solve it. I didn't think it was my place to interrupt their work with something they might already know." "They didn't know," she said. "No," he said. "I understand that now. I should have said something sooner." He looked at her. "I'm sorry I didn't." She was quiet again. "You fix it?" she said. He thought about it, not performing consideration, actually considering the specific technical question. "I believe so," he said. I need to look at the integration points directly. I need my diagnostic tools, which I have at home. It's going to take time, not because the repair is complex, but because I want to do it correctly, and I'm not going to tell you it's done until I'm certain it's done. Okay, she said, just okay. Simple, direct. He appreciated that. One thing, he said, go ahead. I can't do it during my regular shift. I'd need to come in during the day, and I'd probably need to bring Amara. He paused. She's 7. She's very quiet. She brings her own work. Something shifted in Diane's expression, a small shift in the direction of something she had not been expecting. Who's Amara? My daughter, he said. Her mother died 4 years ago. On days when school is out, she comes with me when I have to work. Diane looked at him for a moment. Then she said, bring her. Tell me when you want to start, and we'll have the bay ready for you. He came the following Saturday, which was a school holiday on account of a teacher professional development day that Amara described as a teacher homework day, which Marcus found accurate. He brought his personal diagnostic kit in a worn black canvas bag from Duluth Trading Company that he had bought at the store on Charlotte Pike years earlier, and that had held up through everything since then. Inside the bag, a Snap-on VERUS Edge diagnostic scanner that he had purchased at Stratford and had maintained and updated since, 2 multimeters, a Fluke 117 for general work, and a Fluke 289 for the high-resolution logging the McLaren systems would require, a set of Wera screwdrivers in the sizes the 720S panels required, a Knipex 80 551 250 pliers wrench, a small roll of Tessa 51608 automotive wiring loom tape, and a notebook, a Leuchtturm 1917A5 in black, about 2/3 full with 7 years of diagnostic notes in handwriting that got smaller and more compressed the further into the notebook you went. Amara came with a purple Jansport backpack that contained her chapter book about the bee communicating girl, a Melissa and Doug scratch art drawing pad, 3 Crayola-colored pencils in the colors she considered essential, red, purple, and the specific green she called forest green, which was technically called pine green on the Crayola website, and a Ziploc bag containing a Ziploc bag of Annie's cheddar bunnies, which were her standard working snack. Diane came down to the bay when they arrived. She was not sure why she came down rather than letting Brenda manage the access. She had told herself it was practical, that she wanted to confirm the setup was correct. But standing at the elevator and pressing the button for floor 32, she acknowledged to herself that the actual reason was that she wanted to see the car with the person who was going to fix it. She had been coming down to look at the covered car alone for 3 years, and the idea of being there when someone who knew what they were doing arrived felt like something she needed to witness. She came around the corner of the bay approach and stopped. Marcus was standing beside the uncovered car, which was the first time she had seen it uncovered in months. The vermilion red in the garage lighting was doing the amber thing, deep and warm, and Marcus was looking at it with his hand resting lightly on the rear quarter panel, not pressing, just resting, the way a person rests a hand on something they are preparing to listen to. Amara was beside him, looking at the car with the same focused attention, her purple backpack still on her shoulders, her head at the level of the car's roofline. She said something to her father in a voice too low to carry. He looked down at her and said something back. She nodded and went to a folding chair that had been set up near the bay's north wall and sat down and opened her backpack with the efficient purposefulness of someone who has done this before. Diane watched this from the entrance of the bay. She said nothing for a moment. Marcus noticed her. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "this is Amara. Amara, this is the person whose car we're going to look at." Amara looked up from her backpack with the direct, unperforming gaze of a child who had not yet learned to modulate her attention for the comfort of adults. "Is it a McLaren?" she said. "It is," Diane said. "My dad knows a lot about McLarens," Amara said. She said it as a simple statement of fact, without particular emphasis, the way you state things that are established and not in question. Then she returned to organizing her backpack. Marcus made a sound that might have been a suppressed reaction of some kind and returned to looking at the car. "I'll stay out of your way," Diane said. "You don't have to," he said. "You can stay." She stayed. He worked the way she would learn was simply the way he worked, which had no performance in it. He was not slow, but he was unhurried, which was a different thing. He connected the Snap-on scanner and spent a long time reading the data it produced, not the summary screens, the raw data, scrolling through lines of output with the specific focus of a person who knew what they were looking for in a body of information that looked uniform to anyone else. He took notes in the Leuchtturm notebook in the small, compressed handwriting. He asked the car questions the way her father had once described asking engines questions, not in words, but in the methodical language of measurement and response. At one point, he was flat on his back under the car with a headlamp and both multimeters for 40 minutes without coming out. Diane sat in a second folding chair that Brenda had brought, and she worked through her email on her phone, and she listened to the periodic sounds of someone working alone on something difficult, the careful sounds, the sounds that don't perform. Amara drew on her scratch art pad and ate her Annie's cheddar bunnies with the focused serenity of a person fully content with their situation. At one point, she looked up and asked Diane if she liked the car. "It was my mother's," Diane said. "She never got to drive it." Amara considered this. "Is that sad?" she asked. "Yes," Diane said. Amara nodded. "My mom never got to see me lose my first tooth," she said in the tone of a child who has filed this fact under things that are real and cannot be changed rather than things that require a particular ongoing response. "I saved the tooth. I still have it." Diane looked at her for a moment. "That's a good idea," she said. "Saving it." "I have a box," Amara said. "For things that should be kept." From under the car, Marcus said, "You're being very philosophical in someone else's parking garage." "I'm being conversational," Amara said, with the precise dignity of a 7-year-old who considers this an important distinction. She went back to drawing. Diane looked at the covered section of the car that Marcus had not yet opened and thought about Ruth's spiral notebook in the drawer on the 39th floor, with its list of questions about the McLaren written in neat slanted handwriting. And she thought about Amara's box of things that should be kept. And she thought that a 7-year-old had arrived at something it had taken her 3 years and $800,000 and still not quite get to. Marcus came out from under the car at 2 in the afternoon. He sat back on his heels and looked at the Leuchtturm notebook. He wrote something. He looked at it. "I found it," he said. Diane was very still. "The Stratford integration has a secondary CAN bus line that routes through the left side of the engine bay inside the factory loom," he said, without looking up from the notebook. "There's a connection point on that line that uses a proprietary Stratford connector type that is not in McLaren's documentation. That connector has a micro fracture in the housing. Under certain temperature conditions, the fracture creates an intermittent open circuit on the secondary CAN line. When the circuit opens, the PCM gets a signal conflict it doesn't know how to resolve and defaults to a no-start condition." He looked up. "The factory diagnostic tools see a fully functioning vehicle because the factory systems are fully functioning. The problem is on the secondary line, which the factory tools don't monitor because they don't know it exists." She stared at him. Every specialist was looking in the factory systems. "Yes," he said. "The fault isn't there, it was never there." "How long will the repair take?" He looked at the notebook. "I need the correct replacement connector. It's a Stratford part, not a McLaren part. I can source it." He thought about it. "If I have the part by next Saturday, I can have the car running by end of day." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Thank you." Simple. The kind of thank you that meant the whole thing, not the technical resolution, the whole thing. "I haven't fixed it yet," he said. "You found it," she said, "in one day after 3 years." He looked at the car rather than at her when he answered. "The others were looking for a factory fault. They were very good at finding factory faults. This wasn't one." He paused. "You needed someone who knew about the part of the car that wasn't in the factory." Amara had put down her scratch art pad and was watching this exchange with the focused attention she normally gave to things she was filing for later reference. She looked at her father, then at Diane, then back at the car. "Can we get lunch?" she asked. "We can absolutely get lunch," Diane said, and was surprised to find that she meant it in a way that went beyond the practical resolution of a 7-year-old's hunger. She meant it in the way you mean something when it is the simplest and most straightforward response to something larger. The yes that stands in for all the things that cannot be said in a parking garage on a Saturday afternoon. Marcus sourced the Stratford connector through a former colleague, a woman named Dr. Lynn Kao, who had stayed at Stratford after he left, and who received his call on a Monday morning with the particular quality of no surprise that belongs to people who have always suspected they would hear from you again. She told him the connector was available in Stratford's spare parts inventory and had a part number she gave him from memory, which told him she had used it recently, which told him other McLarens from this generation had the same potential failure point. "Does Stratford know about this failure mode?" he asked. A brief pause. "There have been discussions," she said carefully. "The car's owner spent $800,000 on diagnostics that couldn't find it," he said. "Because it wasn't in any documentation." Another pause. "I'll send you the connector today," she said. "And Marcus, you might want to document this repair carefully." He understood what she meant. He said he would. The connector arrived on Thursday. He came to the bay on Saturday morning at 8:30, before the building's other residents would typically be in the garage, when the light through the parking structure's ventilation slots was the particular pale gray of early Nashville mornings in late March. Amara was not with him. It was a school day, the Saturday make-up session for a weather-related closure, and she was with his sister. He worked alone, and the work had a different quality when Amara was not there, more interior, less narrated, the full attention of a person with nothing else in the frame. He found the connector in the left side of the engine bay, inside the factory loom, exactly where his notes said it would be. The micro-fracture in the housing was visible under the headlamp, a fine line in the gray polymer, the kind of thing that was completely invisible until you knew what you were looking for, and then impossible to miss. He removed the failed connector with the Knipex pliers and the Wera screwdrivers, working slowly because the access was tight, and the loom tape that would need to be relayed around the new connector had to be laid correctly, or the repair would be neat, but the thermal protection would be compromised. He laid the Tessa 51608 loom tape in the correct wrap sequence, which was a detail that the repair manual specified and that he had seen engineers skip because the visual result was the same whether you did it right or not, and the difference only manifested under sustained thermal load. He did not skip it. He seated the new connector. He reconnected the secondary CAN bus line. He reattached the factory loom. He closed the panels. He sat back on his heels and looked at the car for a moment, the way his father had once stood looking at a fixed thing before confirming it was fixed, the pause between the work and the test that belonged to the person who had done the work and knew what it represented. Then he connected the snap-on scanner one more time and ran a final check on the secondary CAN bus line. The reading came back clean, not factory clean, which he now understood meant nothing, actually clean. The secondary line, active and communicating, no signal conflict, no open circuit. The PCM would have what it needed to complete its ignition sequence. He put his tools away in the Duluth bag. He stood up. He looked at the McLaren. He opened the driver's door. The door opened with the specific sound of a very well-engineered car, a sound that was partly mechanical and partly acoustic, the layered sound of materials and tolerances working together the way they were designed to work. He sat in the driver's seat. The leather was cold from the climate-controlled bay. He put his hand on the start button. He was aware, in the way you are aware of things that carry weight beyond their physical dimension, that this was not only a car starting. It was something that had been broken and important being unbroken. It was a promise getting one step closer to being kept. He pressed the button. The McLaren started. The engine came up with the sound that a McLaren twin turbocharged V8 makes when it comes to life, which is a sound that does not allow for indifference. It filled the bay, and it filled the adjacent space, and it went up through the structure of the building in a way that building's designers had not specifically planned for, but that was a consequence of what was now running on floor 32. He sat in the car and let it idle. The gauges came up. All of them clean and steady and reading exactly what they were supposed to read. The PCM was communicating with the factory systems and with the Stratford secondary line, and all of it was working, the whole of it, the way it had been designed to work before the micro-fracture in the housing had begun, slowly and invisibly, its work of disruption. He had not called Diane to tell her he was coming that morning. He had not wanted to create an expectation that something would happen in case something did not happen. The repair had been what he believed it would be. The connector had been what he believed it was. The car was now running. He got out of the car. He picked up his Duluth bag. He stood beside the running McLaren in the quiet bay, and the engine idled. And outside the parking ventilation slots the Nashville morning was doing whatever it was doing, and the vermilion red paint was catching the garage light and doing the amber thing, and he thought about Priscilla. He thought about the things she had said to him once about his work, about the way she had described watching him solve a problem, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and watching him work through something in his notebook and then close it and know the answer. She had said, "You listen to the whole thing and then you answer it, like a conversation. Most people only hear what they already know to listen for." The engine ran. He stood in the bay and he let himself have the moment, which was a thing he did not always allow himself and which felt right to allow today. He called the building's front desk and asked them to let Ms. Calloway know when she was available that the car was running. She was on a call with her general counsel about a contract dispute when the text from Greta came through. The text said, "The garage called. The car is running." She looked at the text. She said to her general counsel, "Marcus, I need to call you back." Her general counsel was named Marcus, which she registered briefly as a coincidence worth nothing except the noting. She took the elevator to floor 32. She came through the garage entrance and she heard the engine before she saw the car, and the sound of it moved through the concrete of the building, and into her chest the sound of an engine you have been trying to hear for a long time moves into you when it finally arrives. It is not a gradual thing. It is immediate, physical, complete. She came around the corner of the bay approach and stopped. The McLaren was running, not idling in the flat sense of a car that has been coaxed into a fragile state. Running cleanly, steadily, the engine putting out the low, authoritative sound of something working exactly the way it was designed to work. No hesitation, no roughness, just the clean mechanical fact of a 4-liter V8 in its proper operation. Marcus was standing beside it with his Duluth bag over his shoulder and his Luchdom notebook in his hand, watching the car run with an expression that she could not immediately categorize. It was not triumphant. It was not the expression of a person waiting for credit. It was the expression of something resolved, something completed, something that had been demanding attention for longer than it should have been allowed to and was now no longer demanding it. She stood in the entrance of the bay. She did not say anything for a moment, because the thing she was feeling did not have an immediate language. The engine ran. She thought about Ruth standing in the parking lot of the restaurant on a June Saturday with the bow and the orange car, and saying, well, that is something. She thought about the spiral notebook on the kitchen counter with its list of questions in the neat, slanted handwriting. She thought about the drawer on the 39th floor that she had not opened in 3 years. She thought about the lesson that Ruth had never got to take, and the open road that Ruth had never got to be on, and the thing she had promised herself in Ruth's garage with her hands on the wheel and the engine off and the transport truck coming up the street. The engine ran. She walked into the bay. She put her hand on the roof of the car, flat, the way you put your hand on something to confirm it is real, and felt the vibration of the running engine coming up through the carbon fiber roof and into her palm. It was real. "It's running," she said. It was a statement of the obvious. She said it anyway because saying it out loud was different from knowing it, and the difference mattered. "It's running," Marcus confirmed in the same register, giving the obvious its due. She pressed her other hand against the car's roof, and she closed her eyes for a moment. The vibration was steady and present and entirely itself. She stood there with both hands on the car and her eyes closed, and the engine ran, and the thing she had been carrying for 3 years, the specific weight of a promise she had not been able to keep, shifted in a way that was not its disappearance but was a change in how it was held. The way grief shifts when something it has been organized around changes, still present, still real, but no longer the same shape. She did not cry. This surprised her later when she thought about it. She had expected to cry. She had stood in this bay and cried once, briefly, in the first year, when the third specialist left without a solution and the distance between where she was and where she had promised to get had felt suddenly very large. But this morning she did not cry. What she felt instead was something that did not fully have a name, something in the territory between relief and grief and gratitude, something that required all 3 categories and was not completely contained by any one of them. She opened her eyes. She looked at Marcus. "How did you know?" she said. He looked at the car. "I built part of that system," he said. "When you've built something, you know how it fails." "The previous specialists had all their credentials," she said, "all their years of experience, and she stopped. "Working in your parking garage," he said, without weight, without accusation, just the plain fact. "Yes," she said, "that." A silence. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. Did you ever think about saying something earlier?" Before the note, he was quiet for a moment. "I thought about it," he said. "I didn't because there were experts here and it wasn't my place." He paused. "Also because I was, as you say, working in the parking garage, and the person you say something to has to decide whether the thing being said is worth hearing based on who's saying it. I wasn't sure that calculation would go the right way." She heard this accurately. She heard the full weight of it. She did not look away from it. "Would it have?" she said. "If you had come to me earlier, before Dr. Offogbu, before all of them, if you had come in the first month and told me you'd worked at Stratford, would I have listened?" He looked at her directly. He was a person who she had come to understand did not soften true things for comfort. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not." She nodded. "Probably not," she said. The engine ran between them, steady and patient and entirely indifferent to the significance of the conversation happening beside it. This was, she thought, one of the things machines were good for. Being present without opinion. Running or not running, without judgment about the people who had. She went upstairs and she opened the drawer. She had known, coming up in the elevator, that she was going to open it. The knowing had arrived somewhere between the 32nd floor and the 39th with a clarity that was not dramatic, just present. The way readiness arrives when it arrives, not on schedule, not because you decided it was time, but because the thing you were waiting to be ready for has happened and the readiness has come with it. The notebook was where she had left it. in the back of the drawer behind 3 months of utility statements she had meant to file and had not. She picked it up. It was a standard spiral notebook, the medium size, with a pale yellow cover and a pen looped through the spiral at the top. Ruth's pen. A Pilot G27 in black ink, which was the pen Ruth had kept on her kitchen counter for years, the one she reached for whenever she needed to write something down, the one she had used to write the McLaren questions on the page that Diane now turned to. The questions were on the 7th page. Everything before them was grocery lists and appointment reminders, and a note to herself to call her sister, and a line that said check on the Murfreesboro Library book sale, which made Diane's chest ache in the specific way that the mundane details of a dead person's life ache when you encounter them, the proof of a life in progress at the moment it stopped. The McLaren questions were 13 in number. Ruth had numbered them because Ruth numbered things she considered important enough to organize properly. They were written in the neat slanted handwriting, each one beginning on its own line. 1. How much power does it actually have, and what does that feel like? 2. Is it difficult to drive? The articles say it has modes. What do the modes do? 3. Is it safe for someone who has never driven a sports car? 4. What tires does it use, and how do I know when they need replacing? 5. Does it have a good sound system? 6. Where would I take it? What kind of road? 7. What is the right speed to first understand what it does? 8. How do I not embarrass myself? 9. Is it fun, or is it frightening, or is it both? 10. Would a lesson in a different car be better preparation first? 11. What does Diane love about it? 12. What would Mama think? This one had a small asterisk next to it, and at the bottom of the page also starred was the notation. She would say it was too much car, and then she would want to try it. Do not mention to Diane until after the first lesson. 13. When? Diane sat in her desk chair with the notebook open in her lap and read the list 3 times. The window in front of her showed the Nashville skyline in the late morning, the Cumberland going silver in the March light, the city doing its ordinary busy thing in all directions. She read question 11. What does Diane love about it? She had bought the car because she had wanted to give Ruth something that was not useful, not practical, not the kind of gift that could be explained by anyone's need. She had bought it because she had wanted for once to give her mother something extravagant and unnecessary and purely for the pleasure of it, the way Ruth had spent 31 years giving her students things that were purely for the pleasure of language and ideas and the widening of a person's sense of what was possible. She had wanted to give back something of that quality. She read question 13. When? Not when will the lesson be, not when can I drive it, just when. The simplest and most demanding form of the question. She sat with the notebook for a long time. Then she closed it carefully and put the Pilot G2 back through the spiral and set it on her desk in the open where she could see it. She picked up her phone and she called down to the garage. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. Is the car still running? She asked. I let it idle for another 20 minutes and then turned it off, he said. It should be run under load before you take it out. The engine needs to work through its full operating range to confirm the repair held. Will you be there next weekend? She said. I can be, he said. I want to drive it, she said. I need someone there who knows the car. A pause. I know the car, he said. I know you do, she said. That's why I'm asking. The story got out the way these stories get out, not through any planned disclosure, but through the particular velocity of true things in a world where true things travel faster than invented ones. A facilities coordinator who had been in the garage during one of Marcus's Stratford calls had mentioned it to a colleague. That colleague had a cousin who worked in technology media. The cousin had found Marcus's sparse LinkedIn profile and the Stratford Dynamics entry and the dates, and had done what technology journalists do with the available information, which was to connect the available dots and publish the result. The piece ran on a Thursday in a technology and business publication with a significant readership among exactly the demographic that had an opinion about a company's CEO spending $800,000 to fix a car while the answer was 17 floors below her. The headline was, she spent $800K on experts. Her parking attendant fixed it free. The subheadline was, what Marcus Webb knew that no specialist did, and what that says about who we think to ask. By Friday morning, it was everywhere. Diane's communications director, a woman named Patricia Soules who had managed Diane's public narrative through a federal investigation and 2 acquisition attempts and who had developed, through those experiences, a nearly complete immunity to surprise, sent Diane a message at 7:45 that said, it's moving fast. Call me when you're up. Diane called at 8. They talked for 20 minutes. Patricia said the sentiment was not hostile, which was notable given the income disparity the story made visible. The primary emotional thread the coverage was pulling was not class resentment, but something different, the question of what expertise looked like when it was wearing the wrong uniform, and whether the systems designed to find talent were built to find all of it or only the expected varieties of it. "That's the more interesting story," Diane said. "It's also the more accurate one," Patricia said. Diane asked her to hold all media requests until Monday. She had some things to do first. The first thing was Marcus. She called him on Friday morning and told him the story was out, that she had confirmed his professional background with media, that her communications team was managing access, and that no one would get his home address or contact information. She told him that she expected media attention would move to him directly and that she wanted him to have the choice, not her communications department, about how to respond to it. "What about Amara?" he said, with the immediacy of a parent for whom this is always the first question. "No one gets anywhere near her," Diane said. "That is not a corporate promise. That is a personal one. I will enforce it myself if I have to." A silence. "Thank you," he said, in the register he used for things that actually mattered to him. "The other thing," Diane said, "I want to talk to you about your role here, not this weekend. Next week when things are quieter, but I want you to know before the conversation that I'm not thinking about what makes a good press story. I'm thinking about what would actually be useful to you." "Okay," he said. "I appreciate that." "And Marcus," she said, "did you really fix the car at no charge?" A pause. "You pay for my parking shift," he said. "I was at work." She laughed. It arrived without warning or management, a short, genuine laugh, the kind that comes out of recognition rather than amusement. She had not laughed that way in a long time. "I'll see you next weekend," she said. The second thing was her own company. She called Sandra Ockhaffer, her head of HR, on Friday afternoon and asked for a meeting the following week. She said she wanted to review the company's application processing system, specifically how applications for non-technical roles were handled when they contained technical background information. She said she suspected the current system had a gap, and she wanted to know its dimensions before she decided what to build to close it. Sandra said she already knew the gap existed. She had known it for 2 years. She had been waiting for the right moment and the right evidence to propose a remedy, because proposals without evidence rarely moved at the speed the problem deserved. "You have the evidence now?" Diane said. "I do," Sandra said. "I'll have a proposal ready by Tuesday." The third thing was the interview. She gave it on Monday to a journalist she trusted, a woman named Alicia Park, who had covered healthcare technology for 12 years and who wrote with the specific care of someone who believed that accurate stories mattered and was willing to do the work to tell them accurately. Diane told her the full story. All of it, the 3 years, the $800,000, the 14 specialists, the note on the maintenance log sheet, the Saturday with Amara's Annie's Cheddar Bunnies and the Luchdom notebook and the Snap-on scanner. She told Alicia what Marcus had said about whether she would have listened in the first month, about the calculation the person being heard had to make about whether the person saying the thing was going to be heard, and she told her what she had answered, which was probably not. "Why probably not?" Alicia asked. "Because I had built a system for finding expertise," Diane said, "and I trusted the system. The system went and found 14 credentialed specialists. It performed exactly the function it was designed to perform. But the system was designed to look in specific places, and the answer was not in those places. It was in a person who had been in my building for 14 months. She paused. The system's failure was not malicious, it was structural. It looked for expertise where expertise was expected to be. It did not look where expertise had gone because life had required it to go somewhere it wasn't expected. "What are you going to do about it?" Alicia asked. "Build a better system," Diane said, "and make sure the people I put in charge of building it have the authority and the budget to actually build it rather than recommend it and watch it get deprioritized because there's always something more urgent." Alicia published the piece on Wednesday. It was read more widely than any profile of Diane Calloway in the previous 3 years. The line that got extracted and shared most frequently was not about the car or the money. It was, the system looked for expertise where expertise was expected to be. It did not look where expertise had gone because life had required it to go somewhere it was not expected. Those words were printed on a card and sent to Diane by a woman she had never met, a retired schoolteacher from a small town in Ohio who had read the article and wanted to say that she recognized the sentiment. The card was signed with a first name only. Diane kept it on her desk beside the spiral notebook. They met on a Wednesday morning in the week after the article ran, in her penthouse sitting room again, with the Nashville skyline doing its April morning thing in the window, the magnolias on the streets below already blooming in the way Nashville magnolias bloom, all at once and without apology. Amara was at school. Marcus came in his own clothes, not his work uniform, dark pants and a flannel shirt in blue and gray that Amara had apparently selected on the grounds that it was a serious shirt, but a friendly serious, a distinction that Diane thought revealed a sophisticated understanding of tonal communication for a 7-year-old. Greta brought coffee. Diane waited until Greta had left and then said, "Tell me what you want, not what you think I'm going to offer, what you actually want." He looked at her for a moment with the recalibrating expression she had seen before. "I want to do work that uses what I know," he said. "Real work, systems integration, diagnostic engineering, the kind of problem solving that requires the whole picture rather than the individual components." He held his coffee cup with both hands. "I left that work because Amara needed me more than the work did, and that was the right choice, and I don't regret it. But she's 7 now. She's more herself every year. She needs me present and reliable, but she doesn't need me to not exist professionally." "What does present and reliable look like in practice?" Diane asked. "School drop-off and pick-up," he said. "Those are non-negotiable. Any work travel has to be planned in advance so I can arrange coverage, not decided on short notice. I need to be reachable by her school during work hours and to be able to respond immediately if she needs me." "All of that is manageable," Diane said. "In writing," he said. "I'm not asking because I don't trust you. I'm asking because agreements that are in writing survive the people who made them when those people have moved on to other priorities." "That's a very accurate description of how corporate commitments fail," she said. "I've watched it happen," he said. "It will be in writing," she said, "with a specific remedy clause if the terms aren't honored, not just a policy, a contract term." He nodded. "The other thing," he said, "I'm aware that the story of me fixing your car is currently generating a press cycle. I don't want my professional work here to be narrated by that press cycle. I want to be evaluated on what I actually do, not on what made a good story last week." "Agreed," she said. "I have no interest in using you as a press asset. If I wanted a press asset, I would have issued a press release when you fixed the car. I didn't." "You gave an interview," he said. "About a systemic problem," she said. "Not about you specifically." He considered this. "That's a fair distinction." "One more thing," she said. "Lynn Kao at Stratford. She mentioned other cars from this generation may have the same failure mode." His expression shifted. "There are likely several hundred 720S vehicles with Stratford secondary integration in the market. The connector failure is a thermal cycling issue. Any car that gets driven regularly in conditions with significant temperature variation is vulnerable to it. Some of those owners will have spent years and significant money trying to diagnose something that isn't in any diagnostic manual. That should be documented and disclosed," she said. "Yes," he said, "it should." "Is that something you want to work on, as part of what you do here?" Something came into his face. Not excitement performed, but the real version, the quiet activation of a person encountering a problem that matches the shape of their mind. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly the kind of problem I want to work on." "Then let's build a role around it," she said. "Systems integration diagnostics with a specific focus on the class of failure that standard tools miss because the modification creating the failure isn't in the standard documentation. Your Stratford background is not just relevant to the McLaren. It's relevant to every client in this building and every client of this company who owns a performance vehicle from that generation." He looked at her. "You run a healthcare technology company," he said. "I run a company whose clients include some of the wealthiest individuals in America," she said, "several of whom have cars sitting in garages that their specialists cannot fix. And what those cars have in common is the same class of problem you solved last Saturday." A silence. "You're building a practice around this," he said. "I'm considering it," she said, "with the right person to lead it." He looked at his coffee, he looked at the window, he looked at the magnolias on the streets below which were doing what Nashville magnolias did in April. "I need to talk to Amara," he said. "Of course," she said, "she'll have questions." "I'd expect nothing less," Diane said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but its first stage. Amara had 4 questions, which she delivered over dinner on a Thursday evening, eating spaghetti from the blue pot that Marcus made Thursday spaghetti in, with Rao's homemade marinara from the jar on the counter, which they had used for 2 years since Amara had declared it the correct pasta sauce after a comparison she conducted with 3 other brands using the criteria of taste, smell, and what she described as the proper thickness, a determination she had defended when questioned. By noting that Rao's homemade used whole peeled tomatoes and real olive oil rather than tomato paste and modified starch, and that this was available on the ingredient label if anyone cared to look. The first question was whether his new job would mean he stopped working overnight, because she liked that his overnight work meant he was usually home when she got home from school, and she did not want to lose that. He told her the new job was daytime hours and that he would be at drop-off and pick-up every day, which was actually better than the current arrangement. The second question was whether the car lady was going to be his boss. He thought about this. Technically, he said. Is she a good boss? Amara asked. I don't know yet, he said, but she says what she means, and when she's wrong about something, she says so. That's important, Amara said in the tone of a person who has developed criteria. Mrs. Castillo says the same thing. She says people who can't admit being wrong get stuck. Mrs. Castillo is right, Marcus said. She usually is, Amara said, except about the solar system project timeline, which was too short. The third question was whether he was doing it because he wanted to or because he thought he should. He looked at his daughter across the blue pot of spaghetti and he thought about Priscilla, who had always known the difference between the things he wanted and the things he thought were required of him, and who had pushed him, consistently and without apology, toward the former. Both, he said. I want to and I feel like I should. Both things are true. Amara twirled spaghetti around her fork with the focused attention she brought to mechanical tasks. Mom would say do it, she said without looking up. Marcus was quiet for a moment. How do you know? He said. Because you said she hated it when you hid from good things? She looked up. This is a good thing. He looked at her for a moment, this child. This specific, precise, particular child who had been 2 years old when her world changed, and who had built herself, out of the materials available, into a person who remembered things he had told her about her mother, and deployed them at the correct moment with the accuracy of someone who had been listening to the whole conversation rather than just her part of it. Yeah, he said. Okay. The fourth question, Amara said, returning to her spaghetti. Go ahead. Is the car lady going to drive the orange car now? She asked. Because that's what it was for, you told me. She looked up again. You told me on the first Saturday when we were driving home. You said the car was her mother's and her mother never got to drive it. I want to know if she's going to drive it now. Marcus looked at his daughter. He thought about the answer. I think she's going to, he said. Good, Amara said. She went back to the spaghetti. Things should be used. That's what they're for. They took the McLaren out on a Saturday in late April, when the Tennessee Hill country north of Nashville was doing the thing it does in April, which is turning every shade of green simultaneously and throwing flowering dogwood into the margins of the roads the way someone's scattering something important. Diane had taken 2 lessons in the week prior, both at a driving facility in Smyrna with an instructor named Randy who had worked with performance vehicle owners for 20 years and who had a manner of communicating technical information that was direct without being condescending, the manner of someone who understood that the car was not the point and the driver's confidence was, and who had told Diane at the end of the second lesson that she was ready. She had not told Marcus about the lessons. She had told him on Thursday that she was ready to drive the car and asked if he would come with her on Saturday, in the same way she had asked before, because she wanted someone who knew the car. He had said yes in the same way he had said it before. She came down to the bay at 9 in the morning. The car was uncovered and running. He had arrived at 8 and run it through its warm-up sequence and confirmed the repair was holding under load, which it was, every reading exactly where it was supposed to be, the secondary CAN bus line communicating cleanly with the PCM, the Stratford connector doing what the new connector was designed to do. Amara was there. It was a school holiday, the last of the year, and she was in the corner of the bay with her Jansport backpack and her chapter book and the Annie's Cheddar Bunnies and the Melissa and Doug pad, which had been replaced since the first visit with a new one because she had filled the first one entirely. She looked up when Diane came in and said, as though they were in the middle of a conversation that had merely been paused, "Are you actually going to drive it today?" "That's the plan," Diane said. "Good," Amara said. She went back to her book. Marcus was beside the car. He looked at Diane with the reading expression, not assessing exactly but aware of something. "You've driven it before," he said. She met his eyes. 2 lessons this week." The corner of his mouth moved. "You could have told me." "I know," she said. "I wanted to be ready before I said I was." He nodded. He understood this. He was a person who had spent years being more ready than his circumstances acknowledged. He understood the relationship between readiness and the decision to act on it. "The hills north on 41A," he said. "The road through Laper's Fork. It has the right combination of straights and curves. It's the road this car was built for." "You know the road," she said. "I drove it once," he said. "A long time ago." He did not say more about this, and she did not ask, because there are things that belong to a person, and the McLaren was not the only one of them that had been folded and kept for later. They took 41A north out of Nashville, through the farms and the rolling green of the Middle Tennessee countryside, Diane driving and Marcus in the passenger seat, and the McLaren doing what McLarens do when they are given road, which is to make the road feel simultaneously shorter and more present than it is. She drove carefully at first, not tentatively, but with the deliberate attentiveness of someone who is learning the communication of a specific machine, the way it tells you about the road through the steering wheel and the seat and the sound of the engine, the language of it. She began to understand the language about 12 miles north of Nashville, somewhere between the first long sweeping left and the straightaway that followed it, where the dogwoods were fully out and the road's surface was smooth, and the McLaren told her, through the steering and the engine response, that it had more to give than she was asking for. She asked for more. The engine opened up in the way that only the specific engine in this specific car opens up, which is not gradual but immediate, a change in both the volume and the character of the sound, from constrained to full, from potential to expression, and the car moved through the straightaway with a force that was controlled and complete, and that she felt in her spine and her sternum and somewhere behind her sternum that she could not anatomize. She held it for 20 seconds. She brought it back. Her hands on the wheel were steady. Her heart was going. "There it is," Marcus said quietly, the same words he had said to someone else in another car on a different afternoon, the same words that meant, "Now you know what this is." She drove through Laper's Fork and out the other side and came back on a different road that curved through the farm country in long, lazy bends, the kind of road that is not about speed but about the pleasure of a good machine doing what it does when it is not being hurried. She drove it that way unhurried, and she thought about Ruth. She thought about question 9, is it fun or is it frightening or is it both? Both, she thought. Ruth would have felt both. Ruth, who had prepared for things, who had written 13 numbered questions in a spiral notebook, who had wanted to take a lesson first from a professional before she got in, would have sat in this seat and felt the thing Diane had just felt, and she would have looked at the road ahead, and she would have laughed the way people laugh when something delights them past the point of composure. Diane knew this about her mother the way she knew things about Ruth that could not be proved but were nevertheless true, the deep private knowledge of a child who has watched a parent their whole life and understands them at a level that does not require evidence. She would have loved this, Diane said. Yes, Marcus said. He did not ask who. He knew who. She drove for a while without talking, and he was quiet with her, and the McLaren ran the Tennessee roads, and the April light moved through the dogwoods, and the engine made its sound, which was the sound of something working exactly as it was meant to work, the clean and particular sound of something that had been broken and important and was no longer broken. "Tell me about Priscilla," she said. She had not planned to say it. It arrived the way true things arrive on the back of other true things without a formal introduction. He was quiet for a moment, the thinking quiet. "She was a teacher," he said. "Kindergarten." She said kindergarten was the year that mattered most because it was the year children learned whether learning was something that happened to them or something they did. She had strong views about this. Did she have strong views in general? Diane asked. "About most things," he said. "About how I worked specifically." She said I had a gift for seeing the whole system and I used it only when the problem was technical. She said I should apply the same method to people. He looked at the road. "She was right about that. Did you?" "I'm better at it now," he said. She would say not good enough yet, but better. "What would she say about this?" Diane said. "All of this." He was quiet for a little longer this time. The road curved and she took it, and the car took it with her, and the dogwoods moved at the margins. "She would say it took too long," he said. "And she would say, well, now you know," and she would ask what you were going to do with what you know. A silence, a good silence, the kind that is full rather than empty. "What do I do with what I know?" Diane said, not rhetorically, actually asking. "Build the system that looks in the right places," he said. "And then use the car." She smiled. She looked at the road ahead, which went on through the green Tennessee countryside for as far as she could see, bending at the edge of vision into the kind of distance that looks like a beginning rather than an end. "Both at the same time," she said. "Both at the same time," he said. She drove. The McLaren ran the road, and the light came through the dogwoods in broken pieces, and the engine made its sound, full and clean, and finally, after 3 years and $800,000 and 14 specialists, and one note on a maintenance log sheet, fully itself. Back in the Callaway Tower parking garage on floor 32, Amara Webb was sitting in her folding chair with her book and her cheddar bunnies and her box of 8 colored pencils from Crayola, including the pine green that she called forest green, and she was drawing the orange car from memory, which was a good memory, the kind that retains both what it saw and what the thing it saw was for. She was drawing it on an open road. She put a driver in the seat. She gave the driver her father's hair and the car lady's shoulders, and she put the sky above them wide and blue and Tennessee clear, the way the sky had been on the morning they drove out. She looked at the drawing for a moment. She picked up the red pencil because the car was the wrong color without it. She colored the car red and then more orange because it had been both depending on the light, and she sat back and looked at the whole thing. It was right. Things that were used correctly looked right. That was something she had understood for a long time, from watching her father work, from watching him listen to machines and ask them questions and hear the answers that other people had missed. You could not use something correctly without knowing what it was for, and you could not know what it was for without actually looking. She put the drawing carefully in her backpack between two hardcover books so it would not be bent. She would put it in the box when she got home, the box of things that should be kept. The box was a wooden cigar box, the kind you could get at tobacco stores, with a brass clasp and her name on the lid in her father's handwriting, written with a Sharpie fine point black marker on a piece of masking tape that he had pressed carefully to the wood. She had filled it over 4 years with the things that seemed important to save. A first lost tooth, a friendship bracelet from her best friend Kezia, a photo of her mother from a framed picture that had been replaced with a newer one, and this one had almost gone away, a card her grandmother had written on her 6th birthday, and the science achievement notebook, which was getting too fat for the box, but she kept trying to fit it in because the box was where the important things went. She would put the drawing in the box, and years from now, when she opened the box the way people open the boxes they kept their important things in, to see what was there and who they had been and what had mattered, she would find the orange McLaren on an open road with 2 people in it, and she would remember exactly what the day had felt like and exactly what it had meant. Some things were too important not to keep. Some things you saved because they were proof of something, and the proof mattered, and the box was the place for things whose proof mattered. She zipped her backpack. She ate the last 3 Annie's cheddar bunnies. She looked at the empty bay where the orange car had been and where it would return, and she waited with the patient and confident attention of a person who had learned from someone who knew that things worth waiting for were worth the waiting, and that they came back. The engine sound arrived before the car did. She heard it in the parking structure, coming up through the concrete from the entrance ramp, the full, unmistakable sound of a McLaren 720S returning from a road it had finally been allowed to know. She sat very still for a moment, listening. Then she reached into her backpack and took out a fresh piece of scratch art paper and a new pencil, because the arrival deserved its own drawing, and she began.